Right now, we've got the leader of the Titanic mission, Dr. Robert Ballard, live on ship-to-shore telephone. He was the first to see the Titanic's wreckage. Let's talk with him now. Good morning, Dr. Ballard.
Roger, this is Woodfall Research Vessel Nora. How do you copy? Over.
I copy you well. Let me ask you, can you bring us up to date on what must be an extraordinary sight? Exactly what have you seen so far?
Well, at the present moment, the vehicle has just passed over the bridge of the ship. The ship is in a very state of condition. Some parts of the ship are remarkably in great shape. About 10 minutes ago, we saw beautiful color pictures of cases and cases of wine bottles, totally undamaged plates, all sorts of other material that did not break up, whereas other parts of the ship are damaged. Over.
Well, as you say, you have seen cases and cases of wine. There are supposedly lots of other valuables, jewelry on the ship. Do you plan to try and discover that?
No, that's not the goal of the expedition. It's really to image the vessel. There's no plans at all to touch the vessel or to attempt to recover anything. Over.
Why is that, Dr. Ballard? Is it that you do not want to remove the ship from under the water, or is it just too expensive to do so?
I believe the ship is a memorial to 1,500 people that died, and I have no desire to desecrate it. Over.
How can you be sure then, if you leave the ship where it is, that other people will not come and try and salvage it, will try and search for the valuables believed to be on board?
I really can't say what others are going to do. I hope that the U.S. government and the French government, who sponsored both phases of this expedition, can work out a way to ensure that the Titanic is made into an international memorial and left alone. Over.
Dr. Ballard, you've discovered the boilers Sunday morning. You've discovered the other things 10 minutes ago, as you mentioned. How do you proceed from here? What's next?
Well, we've pretty well identified the forward half of the ship, from the second funnel forward, across the bridge to the bow. The bow is, upper part of the bow is in remarkably good condition, considering the fact that it's the part that felt the iceberg and the part that collided with the bottom. The under part of the bow is badly damaged where the boilers came out, but the actual top, the very small little flagpole right on the very tip of the Titanic's bow is still standing there totally pristine. Over.
How many more days do you plan to continue the expedition?
We should be finished with the testing that we want to do with our vehicles in the next day or so, and hope to be heading home soon. Over.
And then will this continue periodically? Will you be returning to the site every couple of months?
No, definitely not. The weather window in this area is rather severe. We've experienced extremely heavy seas and heavy wind the other night, so this is not the nicest place in the world to come. One can only come during the summer weather window, and what we do in the future is really going to be determined by the Navy. Over.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning, Dr. Ballard, and best of luck to you.
The SOS distress call was begun in 1912. It was used for the first time by the Titanic.
The quest for the Titanic has been one of the great adventure missions of this century, a mission which, as you know, was finally completed on Sunday morning by that team of French and American scientists we just heard from one of them. Well, three people who have been following all of this week's news with very special interest are joining us this morning. First, in Washington, Mr. Bill Garrett, who is the editor of the National Geographic magazine, the National Geographic Society, has shared the cost of the search expedition along with the U.S. Navy. Here in New York is Walter Lord. He is the author of A Night to Remember. That's a reconstruction of what happened the very night that the ship went down. And Stephen Lash, president of the Ocean Liner Museum, and he will tell us what the Titanic was like before it finally hit that iceberg. Mr. Garrett in Washington, if I could begin with you, sir, this has obviously been a very successful mission. What is special about this one that causes this team to be successful when so many others have failed?
Well, I think basically the technology they're using. I think it's safe to say that Bob Ballard is the leading expert on underwater exploration. And we have some art, if you want to see it now, showing the machine with which he's photographed the Titanic.
All right.
This is basically it's the Navy ship, which has an umbilical cord which reaches down 13,000 feet. And Bob literally flies this vehicle called the Argo. It's sort of a space age, like a satellite in space, only it's a satellite on the ocean floor. It's flying around down there over the bridge and around the ship with several cameras, radar, sensors, so forth to record. So they're all sitting on a nice warm cabin up on the deck while the robot's down on the bottom doing the work for them.
Which obviously makes it much safer for everyone, doesn't it?
Well, there's nobody likely to be down around 13,000 for a long time anyway.
It is surprising to me, at least, to find that the ship is in such remarkable condition. Dr. Ballard just told us that he can see cases of wine, and the wine is not even damaged. Remarkable.
Well, talking with Bob, he said they found baggage. Apparently, the boiler went right out through the side of the ship and took with it stuff out of a storage room. So there's suitcases, china, all sorts of things lying around there, but you have no life to speak of down there, so you don't have coral or algae growing on objects that you would have in a reef or other shallow water.
Should we assume also that the cold helps preserve
Oh yes, the cold
everything?
and the lack of oxygen is a great preservative.
What do you think is down there?
Well, it's what's down in terms of a ship, of course, is exactly what went down. But as far as life, there may be some very deep fish, sharks, so what, flying around down there. But
Right.
basically, it's empty. It's pretty barren.
We heard Dr. Ballard say that he believes that this should be left as a memorial to those people who died. What do you think, sir?
Well, the ocean floor is the greatest repository of historical artifacts, archaeological sites on Earth, undisturbed sites. And I think the world will have to come to some understanding of how to treat these objects. They're not just something to be ripped off and stolen and used as loot for whoever can get to them.
Thank you, sir. Let me turn now to Stephen Lash, who is with the Ocean Liner Museum. And you can tell us what this ship was like before it finally came to its resting place. They called it the ship that could not be sunk, and they called it a grand palace. Both were not accurate, we know that. Was it a grand palace?
It was a grand palace indeed. The whole idea in constructing these ships was to create the illusion of being in a wonderful British palace or French country house.
We have some pictures here you might be able to have a look at. Actually, they're right there. We're seeing one of the artist's rendering, I appear, of some of the drawing rooms. What were they like?
This here is a rendering, I believe, of one of the private suites, and you had a choice of traveling in a suite that might have been decorated in the Adam design, or if your tastes were more flamboyant, Italian Renaissance or Georgian.
Here, we've got actually a model that we have set out here. This appears to be a huge ship as I look at it. It could have housed how many people?
Oh, well, it was really a matter of thousands of people, particularly when you consider both the passengers and the crew.
All right, now, but as you look at it, right along here, we see a few lifeboats. Not very many of them, it appears, for thousands of people. Stupid, wasn't it?
It was very silly indeed. The regulations that the ship was sailing under were completely out of date, as I understand it.
And finally, on that night, Mr. Lord, who has written A Night to Remember, you can tell us what happened. People thought that this hull was so braced that it could not suffer any damage that would cause it to go down.
Nobody could imagine anything worse than a collision where two watertight bulkheads joined. So it was built so that it would float if any two compartments were flooded. It was divided into 16 watertight compartments. So it seemed a perfectly safe margin if you constructed it so that a collision at the juncture of two compartments flooded those two, nothing else could happen. But that wasn't the way the accident happened, as so often is the case.
It ran into an iceberg. Now, we have just a few minutes, but tell us, give us a sense of what it was like on that deck as the panic began to set in and people began to realize what was happening to them.
The most remarkable thing, I think what's most memorable, is that there wasn't panic. It was a magnificent display of sort of chivalry of the old school that we don't see very much anymore. And the first-class passengers, the men stood back in a sort of gallant way and helped the women in. It was a great setback to women's rights. Women and children first was the rule.
Wasn't there one gentleman, as I recall, a millionaire who put on white tie and said, if I shall go down, I shall go down as a gentleman?
That was Benjamin Guggenheim, who, with his secretary, dressed in full dress. But some of the passengers were in full dress because you always dressed for dinner in those days on a ship, and you didn't just wear a tuxedo, you wore a white tie and tails.
As they were facing that icy water, were they full aware of what was ahead of them, that there was no hope for them to be rescued?
Toward the end, they were fully aware, yes. For a long time, nobody appreciated the enormous damage that had been done to the ship. And that, of course, is part of the intriguing aspect of the story, that the gradual realization that this was really serious.
Mr. Lord, you have such a fascination with this subject, and there it rests with so much intact. Dr. Ballard says he doesn't want to disturb it. What do you think? In just a couple of seconds to say it.
I agree with Dr. Ballard completely. It should not be disturbed, although I think it's entirely different and question and marvelous that he's developed the equipment that has been able to find it.
Gentlemen, all of you have given us some fascinating things to think about one of the great tragedies in American sailing. Thank you all.